Welcome to this special edition of Women in Film's Laptop Cinema Club, the series where we bring you compelling conversations and exclusive behind-the-scenes stories from some of the most dynamic and talented female creatives bringing you the media that you love. I am delighted to welcome all of you on Zoom and Facebook to our discussion today with director Jessica Swale and lead actors Gemma Arterton and Gugu and Mbatha-Raw to discuss the new IFC film SUMMERLAND, the nostalgic wartime drama about a reclusive writer resigned to a solitary life on the seaside cliffs of southern England while World War II rages across the channel. Before we begin today's discussion and I introduce you to our special guests and our moderator, I'd like to let you know that we will be talking to the incredible female writing staff of Late Night with Seth Meyers next Thursday. We'll be talking about women in comedy, carving a space in the late night talk show world. So we'll post the RSVP link in the chat. Y'all make sure to sign up. You know these programs are for you. Finally, our guest today will be taking questions, so please feel free to use that Q&A button at the bottom of your Zoom window or post away in the Facebook chat. We will get to as many of those questions as we can. So now I want to introduce you to our guest and our moderator today. British actress Gemma Arterton is well known for her stage and screen presence. In addition to her starring role in SUMMERLAND, she recently starred as Vita Sackville-West in the biopic Vita and Virginia, telling the true story of the love affair between Vita and literary icon Virginia Woolf. Upcoming projects include another starring turn as singer Dusty Springfield in the biopic So Much Love, and a leading part of the voice cast of the upcoming family animation Space Dog and Turbo Cat. More of her phenomenal passion in the all-star murder mystery, Quantum of Solace, 100 Streets, Lost in Austin, Their Finest, Orphaline, The History of Love, as well as a host of riveting performances on the stage. Gugu Mbatha-Raw is an award-winning actor of the stage and screen. Her stage performances include Hamlet and Nell Gwyn, for which she was nominated for Best Actress at the 2015 Evening Standard Theater Awards. In film, you've seen her in A Wrinkle in Time, Larry Crown, Belle, Motherless Brooklyn, Cloverfield Paradox, Free State of Jones, Beauty and the Beast, among others. In 2016, she starred in San Junipero, the only episode of the Netflix anthology series Black Mirror ever to offer a happy ending, which is how my friends and I refer to it. Also, if you are like me, you remember her and fondly from Doctor Who. Let's talk about that later. She also appears in the Apple Prestige drama The Morning Show. And finally, writer-director Jessica Swale is an Olivier Award-winning writer and director, hailed as one of Variety's top 10 Brits to watch in 2019, and one of the 5 recipients of BAFTA's JJ Screenwriting Bursary Awards. She's originally a lauded theater director, and she began her career by setting up the Red Handed Theater Company to create lively new versions of classic plays, and was quickly named the Best Young Director of Period Comedy by The Guardian. Her second play, Nell Gwyn, was an original comedy and transferred from a sellout run at Shakespeare's Globe End to the West End, where it won Best New Comedy at the 2016 Olivier Awards. This is notable because Nell Gwyn explores the life of one of the first female actresses, Nell Gwyn, which was originally played by Gugu Mbatha-Raw and also by Gemma Arterton, both of them here today. And it's about her time as an orange seller to starring on stage in her life as the King's escort. SUMMERLAND is her debut feature film. I can't wait for us to talk about it. I can't wait to get into it with our moderator, journalist Rebecca Sun, formerly of The Hollywood Reporter. She has been a longtime writer covering the business of entertainment. We've had her moderate conversations here at Women in Film before. She is a favorite. Everyone, please welcome Rebecca, Jessica, Gemma, and Gugu.
Thank you guys so much for joining us, and Jessica, Gemma, and Gugu for joining us from, I think you guys are all in the UK right now. Hopefully things are okay and a little slightly healthier and saner over there than here stateside, but thank you for your time. Now, I wanna say at the top of this that I know not everybody who's watching this panel has had an opportunity to watch SUMMERLAND yet. You will all get that opportunity come Friday, I believe. It's well with your time, but with that in mind, we are going to try to make this panel as friendly to those who haven't seen the movie. We won't go into all the particular details of the outcome of events, but we'll try to give you as much context as possible in order to whet your appetite. So let me start by asking you, Jessica, you have a storied career for stage as a playwright and as a director for stage, and SUMMERLAND, both your first screenplay and directorial feature. I understand that you had a grant to create your first movie. What was your original inspiration in terms of deciding what to make that movie about?
Yeah, that's a really good question. I mean, I'd actually been writing quite a lot for the screen at that point, but everything that I was writing was based on something that already existed, and quite often they were screenplays based on my own work. So I was writing the adaptation for screen of Nell Gwyn and Blue Stockings, but this was, because it was a bursary from BAFTA, they wanted to encourage new original stories. And so they said to the 5 of us, here's some time to start from scratch, but you cannot start based on anything that exists. It can't be inspired by a novel or a real event. It has to be just something that's new specifically for the cinema. So I sort of mulled that question and started thinking, well, what is it that makes cinema so unique? What story would exist best in this medium? And I began to think about what I love in cinema, which is the fact that I use it as a bit of an escape to move away sometimes from my everyday life. I don't really want to go to the movies to see something that's exactly like what I see on the street outside. There's plenty of fantastic films about real life, but someone else can write them. What I want to do is to test the boundaries of what cinema can do, which means to me thinking about what could exist outside our normal experiences, whether that's moving outside our time, but also outside our normal understanding of the world. So I started thinking about magic, because I love magic realism, and I think the cinema can capture that so well. And from the notion of magic and mystery, I started thinking about, well, how does that relate to real life, and how does it relate to this place and English folklore, and the notion of sort of myths and legends. I thought, oh, that's a really good topic. I love the sort of connection between the stories of the past and the stories now. So the idea of writing the character that became Alice was really about finding a way of looking at those stories and celebrating and investigating the magic from them, but also trying to find a sort of thriller element as well. So she's not only someone who is a cynic about magic and wants to work out the reality behind the folklore because of things that have happened in the past, which have made her into a sort of hardened woman. But also I loved the idea of the sort of detective story of it. And I wanted to take the audience along with that, so that we created a sort of crime wall effectively of all her ideas, so that she was an investigator. And that was something that, particularly for a woman, the appeal of writing a really intelligent heroine who was on a mission is something that I thought, you know, that's something I'd like to see.
I love that the first shot you see of Alice, both when she's played by Penelope Wilton, the older version of Alice, and Gemma is just that classic like cigarette and a typewriter and like black coffee with like 5 cubes of sugar in it. And it's very evocative, and it is something that you seldom see women, you know, in that role, and particularly women in a previous era. You know, before we go further, let's just very simply, you know, set the scene of the film again for people who haven't seen it. Let's maybe, Gemma, will you introduce your character and sort of the setting, and then Gugu talk about who you play as well?
Sure. So I play Alice Lamb, who is a folklore investigator / disprover. So she uses science to disprove myth and magic. So basically she's a big cynic, and she lives on the on the edge of the country, literally on a cliff's edge. She's a reclusive woman, and she's deliberately excluded herself from society for practically her whole life. And all of the people that live near her sort of speculate about her, that she's a witch, or she's different to everybody else, particularly at that time, which is sort of wartime, 1940s. And suddenly, unbeknownst to her, a young evacuee from London is delivered to her doorstep, and she's told that she has to look after him, and she has to take him into her care, which is something that she's completely unfamiliar with, caring for anybody or allowing anyone into her sphere. She's a passionate writer and investigator, as I said, so anyone that sort of gets in the way of her work is done for. And she takes in this young boy called Frank, who is just adorable and charming and inquisitive and a bit magical. And as she gets to know him and lets him in, she also is revisited by flashes of her past, particularly of her past love affair with another woman, played by Gugu. There you go, Gugu. I set it up.
That my cue.
Good segue.
Yeah. Yeah. I play Vera, and Vera's a bit of a whirlwind, really. I mean, I think, you know, as Gemma said, she's sort of, you know, as the audience are introduced to her, she's sort of this figment of, you know, is she from a dream? Is she from the past? Is she from a memory? We're not quite sure, but she's sort of a very spirited, fun, I suppose, socialite. She's just brilliantly kind of charismatic, and she knows where all the parties are, and she knows like all the best jazz clubs, and you know, she's just in the scene, and that's where we sort of first meet her in the 20s. And then, I mean, without giving too much away, we see her in other periods and how her life evolves. But you know, initially, you know, she's very much you know, this sort of bright, vivacious spirit that kind of comes into Alice's life early on, and you know, stays, the memory of their relationships stays with her.
I love that. I think, you know, Jessica, you mentioned magical realism, and Vera really does represent sort of this element of magical realism, especially, you know, obviously in the flashbacks, we're kind of seeing her through Alice's memory, right? Of a literally more brighter, happier, you know, less war-torn time. And the juxtaposition between Vera sort of representing whimsy and fantasy, and Alice being like the biggest cynic you've ever met.
Yeah.
It's a great tension. So there's these two through lines, right, in this film, you know, and you have Alice, who is haunted by her past relationship with Vera. And then you have Alice very, very reluctantly developing a new relationship with this boy, Frank. What came to you first in this story, Jessica, in terms of, I mean, it sounds like it started with this idea of Alice as a character, but how did you, you know, decide, okay, well, what happens to her? What is her story about?
Well, I write quite subconsciously, actually, so it's quite difficult after the fact to unpick exactly how those ideas fell out. But I started off really by thinking about the themes that I was interested in, and things that give me that flighty feeling in my stomach in terms of what I get really excited by. And one of those is imagination and curiosity. I love the idea of going out and exploring the world and like grasping it and seeing what's there. And I like to write that curiosity into characters, and actually thinking about it, a lot of the heroines that I've written have had that sort of spirit of inquiry and investigation, and there's something of that in Frank, and I think that's what Frank and Alice have in common. But I really wanted to sort of put open-mindedness and the importance of being yourself at the heart of the story. And so in order to crack Alice's hard exterior, and to get her to question her beliefs, and those beliefs that have turned her into a shell that is very difficult for anyone else to enter, she sort of built a wall around herself. To me, there's something about having a young, innocent person being the wise one. That's always, you know, the child is father of the man. There's something interesting in that. And I've always really enjoyed writing and watching young protagonists. You know, Scout, for example, in To Kill a Mockingbird, it's no surprise that she is a lot of people's favourite novel heroine, because when you look through the eyes of a child, they have a wiseness for sure, but also we can enjoy something of knowing that we know the world a bit better than they do, but sometimes they can see it more clearly. And so one of the key moments in the film, which people may well be familiar with because it's in the trailer, is that Alice asks Frank very directly whether he would find it strange that a woman was to love another woman. That's not a spoiler, I don't think. And he thinks about it, and he says no. And quite a few people have asked, oh, is he so open-minded because he's got some sort of knowledge of this, or he knows about it, or he's had parents that were very open-minded, for example? And they said, no, it's nothing to do with his background. He's just a child. And if you ask a child, is it strange for one person to love another person? Why on earth would they think it was? It's only with the sort of aging, the prejudice that we get fed as we grow up that stops us from being that sort of simple in our thinking. And I wish we were all more like Frank. The world would be a much, much kinder place. So it was lovely that came quite early on, because I always want to write work that's got something. I always want to write work that's optimistic and that has a heart and that has something to try and better the world, even if it's in a tiny little way. And that theme to me felt like it was an important story to tell.
Yeah, I agree. Again, I think without spoiling things, anybody who's weary of seeing a tragedy about two period women in love, this is not a tragedy. So, it's actually a nice salvo for these times, I think. I'm going to ask a listener question here. Gemma, what drew you to this film? Now, I know that both you and Gugu have worked with Jessica. You've been in her plays. And so I know that there's a pre-existing relationship, but at what point during Jessica's development process did you enter and then, participate both as an actor as well as an executive producer?
Yeah, so when I just finished doing Nell Gwyn, and Jess and I had become friends during that process. And I have a production company, so I'm always looking, and our drive is to find female-centric, work. So somebody had told me about SUMMERLAND. I think it might have been another director or something, and said, oh, you just worked with Jess Swale, and it's this beautiful, you should read it, get her to send it to you. So I did. And at the time I didn't know anything about it, apart from that it was about an older woman and a young evacuee boy during the Second World War. So I didn't read it because Alice was written older originally. She was written in her, I'd say, sort of late 50s sort of thing. So I didn't read it at all with the notion of performing in it. There wasn't really a role for me in my mind. So I read it blindly, which is the best way to approach this film, I think. And I was just really blown away by it. It took my breath away. There's a particular moment where I was just stunned and teary, and I broke down. And it never happens ever when I read scripts. It's very rare that I get emotional. I think that's a good benchmark for something. And I remember I called Jess straight afterward and said, oh my God, come on, we have to make this film. You should direct it as well, because it's so clear on the page that you see this film. It was so visual, the script. And so then we set about, we went for dinner and went, oh yeah, let's make this film. And then Jess said, well, you should play Alice. And I was like, oh, because I just hadn't thought about that. And so then we set about, Jess went about kind of adapting the script somewhat so that I could play Alice. And that was really exciting, because I came at it from, usually you as an actress, you're getting sent the script at the last moment, really, in the development process when it's financed and whatnot. And so it was sort of the other way around, which meant I could really invest in the development. And Jess and I worked together on, changing the script slightly, working on that before we even found a producer and finance and all of that. So felt like I was sort of, in terms of character work, doing that work for much longer than I normally would, which was really invaluable, because it was quite a departure for me character-wise. It just meant that I could take my time getting it into the bones of me. So that's how it came about, really.
Yeah, I mean, I think we should say too that, I mean, indie filmmaking is not easy. And I think that women who have been through the process actually are even more experienced and talented and skilled, because it is at least 2 times harder for women to get a movie made.
I have to tell you, I mean, Jess and I, if it wasn't for me and Jess, I think I can say this, Jess, there was a time when it almost didn't happen because certain people weren't quite sure about it. And one day we said, Jess and I said, well, we're going to have to go in there and just make them do it. So Jess and I went to the offices of this place, and we sort of got this
We
meeting.
might have dressed up a little bit.
We put our leather trousers on, didn't we?
Yeah.
And we went in there and we said, I've got to make this film. And then they went, oh, right then, didn't they? But they were ready to let it slip away.
Yeah.
And
yeah.
I wondered why that was. Maybe because, I mean, maybe a bit because this is such a female, it's got so much femininity in it.
Yeah.
And these guys wouldn't necessarily be what they'd be kind of searching for. I don't know, or they didn't, but they went with it. And now, you know, I just think, thank God we had the wherewithal to go, we can't let anybody else handle this stuff. We're going to have to really fight for it. And we did. Yeah. It is really hard, especially for a first time female filmmaker, to get people to believe in you and trust in you. And even though I was always going, look at the script, it's all in there. You have to kind of fight that. It's like an extra wall to break down. But we did it. So I'm really proud.
We did it. And I think that's partly also because it's not a small film. People really expect when you're making your first feature for it to be low budget, and all of the funds in this country for people making a first feature that you can apply to as a new director, your budget has to be under £1 million, and for a lot of them it has to be under £10,000. We knew that we couldn't make the film the way that we wanted to for less than about 4 or 4.5 million at the very, very least. And there was a question of compromising and saying, well, could we do it with a tiny budget? Could we cut large swathes of it out and make it cheaper and not have this sequence and not have that sequence? But that's why we went to fight in those meetings, because it was a case of saying, no, you know what, if you're going to tell a story, tell it the way it ought to be told, and do it that honour. And actually, I would rather have taken a really long time to get this right and to do it with the amount of money that supports the story as it's meant to be told. And I think that is a tricky thing for new directors, and I think it's also a tricky thing for women, because we're not taught to walk into rooms and to say, you've got to trust me. We're very much sort of encouraged to be grateful and quiet and to be very polite, and we know from a very early age that actually being in any way bolshy often makes you seem dislikable. And look at Alice at the beginning of the film and how tough she is, and how much that makes people bristle. Whereas if she'd been a cranky old man, we'd have just thought she was really funny and we'd have accepted that straight away. But to have a young woman being seeming rude and seeming unmaternal and seeming a bit mean to kids, that's, you know, that puts lots of people in a spin and they don't know what to do with it.
There's a great character moment right at the beginning with a little girl who wants a piece of the rationed chocolate in the shop that like just instantly helps you understand who Alice is. She's not afraid to steal candy from a baby, basically.
Yeah.
I so relate to that, because sometimes kids are really annoying and you just got to take the candy out of their hand and say, shut up.
It's character building. It'll toughen them up. And Gugu, I also want to ask about your entree into the project. And I guess a question for both you and Jess, which is, you know, at what point did you envision that, you know, again, somebody you worked with, Gugu, you originated the role of Nell Gwyn on stage. You know, at what point did you think, okay, you know, like, I think this is a good fit?
For me,
Both of you.
Sure. Goose, do you want to answer?
Yeah, I don't know that answer. Jess, you'll have to answer that part of it. I mean, for me, I've known Jess for such a long time. We, in fact, did our very first jobs out of drama school, and Jess out of university, in a Shakespeare production which I was acting in, and Jess was assisting the director, and the director was, okay. Jess ended up doing lots of work on that production, which was amazing. And so we've known each other for such a long time, and I've known Jess's work through theatre, through her establishing her theatre company, and everything, that sort of evolution to directing and now screenwriting. And so I think I remember the first time I heard about Summerland, I knew it was a BAFTA sort of bursary. It was BAFTA supported for her to write it. And I know that she got sort of some mentorship from John Madden, who was a director that I worked with on Miss Sloane, and what an amazing director, because he famously obviously did Shakespeare in Love, amongst many other things. And so I knew he was a mentor, I believe, a little bit for Summerland as well. And I remember I hadn't really read it at all, but I remember Jess just sort of telling me, sort of pitching me the whole story, and it, I sort of teared up. It was so emotional, and the way that she just described the story to me before it really even fully existed, I think, as a script, really moved me. And and I didn't really, like Gemma, I didn't really at all envisage myself being in it. I was just like, wow, that's an amazing story, go Jess. And it's so original. And it wasn't until much later when Jess was like, oh, like, would you be interested in playing Vera? And I was like, wow. So yeah, I don't know when that idea came into Jess's mind, but I like Gemma, was sort of surprised. I initially just read it not even read it, but I heard of the story quite objectively, not really seeing myself in it necessarily.
Oh, actually, I have a follow-up question for Jess. So if you were going to say something, maybe this will help, which is, again, I think that when you originally wrote this, I mean, neither of your leading ladies necessarily, thought that these were parts for them. And so I was wondering, at what point did they become sort of Alice and Vera in your mind? And this is actually partially a listener question, is, how did you adapt then the script and make certain changes in the story once it became Gemma and Gugu?
Well, I don't normally write with an actor in mind, because I feel like the most interesting characters are really unfamiliar to me. And if I write based on a person, then it's slightly more difficult to sort of channel a voice, or not quite as interesting, because the way I like to write, I start to think a lot about that character, and I write bits, and then I write a lot. And actually it's through the process of writing scenes, lots of which won't make it into the film, that's how I get a character's voice right, because I literally write them talking and then I get to know them. So when I started this, I really didn't know who Alice was at all. So I was going to have no idea about who might play her, because I didn't really know what kind of character she was. And that's always the same with me. And that's how I enjoy writing, because I don't have a very scientific approach. I know a lot of people use a sort of treatment at the beginning and make a very definite plan. But I tend to think anything that you could plan in 3 or 4 pages, what's the likelihood of that really ever surprising an audience? Because usually if you're making a very tight plan, that sort of thing, is very much going to be either predictable or based on a formula that we know works. And so in order to write spontaneously, I just sort of hung out with Alice for a while and really enjoyed her crankiness, and enjoyed slightly vicariously writing the person that I would like to be if I could really speak my mind and say exactly what I wanted with 0 consequences. So when I had the idea of casting Gemma, I was very cautious to change the age of the character, but not in any way to rewrite it for her, because I think there's a great danger that if you write something for an actor, you write for what you know that actor can do, or for them as a person. And I knew Gemma very well, and if I tried to make it suit her, then that's a real discredit to her as an actor, actually, because part of the joy of working with actors like Gemma and Gugu is how much they're absolute chameleons and they can turn their hands to anything. And so in a way, the further away I write from what I know they can do, the more interesting. And so for Gemma, I loved the fact that this isn't the sort of part I'd seen her play before. That was one of the reasons casting her was so appealing, because I knew it would be fun and interesting and a stretch, and we could really explore that. And for her as well, hopefully that would make it more interesting, because she gets to stretch some slightly different muscles. And with Vera, I knew that I needed somebody who, in a very short space of time on the screen, could absolutely capture that sense of fun and wit and sort of the delectable 20s, and the notion of sort of someone who you'd meet and you'd go, whoa, I'm never going to forget that person. And we have so little time to do that in the story, and Alice has to be so bowled over by her very quickly. It was so obvious that Gugu could do that, because that's what I remember from her the first time I met her, you know, 15 years ago or whenever, when we were in rehearsals, and, you know, and we've been firm friends ever since. And she's so, Gugu is so charismatic and energetic and life-grabbing in real life. So I knew that she had those qualities, but I also knew that there's a lot in the film where she's expected to, you know, where Vera is both volatile and very vulnerable. And so I knew it would be really fun to work with Gugu, because she's so capable of that emotional depth. So yeah, also it's lovely to work with people that you love, because it's quite a big moment directing your first full feature. And I had been writing, I had 3 or 4 other feature films on the go, but all as a writer, which keeps you a little bit safer. But when it's writing and directing and it's all on you, you know, having some teammates who you know have got your back as well is no bad thing.
And you know what they're capable of. That makes sense.
Yeah.
There's a wonderful listener question that I don't even want to wait any longer to ask you. I think it's really smart. It's from Haley Paskovich. She says, you know, Jessica, why was it important to you that Summerland be told as a queer story? In other words, what is it about the nature of this particular story that lends itself to a thoughtful exploration of queerness?
Good question. Really
Right?
good question. Mm-hmm. Well, funnily enough, the nub of this, there's several reasons. One is that I really believe in writing good parts for women. And I'm really fed up of seeing people who I know are truly capable actors, female actors, actresses, always playing the small, uninteresting love interest. And one of the reasons why it's great to have more gay love stories is that it gives women much more interesting things to do, because you've suddenly got 2 interesting parts if you write them well enough. Because I hope that, you know, whilst Vera is arguably the love interest, she's not a character who's one-dimensional, as a lot of female love interests are written to be. So it's partly about giving women screen time and telling a story with quite a female heart. But actually it was also a slight sort of frustration with the way that I've seen the same stories told and told again. And I felt like anytime I'd seen a queer love story set in the past, the drama of that relationship is always to do with how hard it is to be gay. So in other words, a lot of gay films that get into the mainstream are about that. That is the central premise. And I am, my experience, I'm not gay myself, but my experience of many, many friends who are in queer relationships, it has always been, that's not what keeps people apart. We need to start telling these stories where, you know, like anybody now, the reason why a gay relationship might not work is because of all number of things. Like, for example, because you want different things. And it's the same as, you know, the debate about casting and race. You know, we need to be having lots of people of color telling stories that are nothing to do with race. They should be telling every story. And this kind of comes from the same point. And actually, while I was writing, I was having a debate in myself with my partner, where I didn't know if he and I necessarily we were both torn about having children. We weren't sure. And I kept changing my mind and thinking it was really important to me, and then it wasn't. And also that how that tied into whether I could do that and have a career. I'm passionate about my work, and it's really important to me. And what if I did that? Could I also be a mother? Can I be a good daughter? Can I be a good lover? How do I do all of those things at once? And I felt like this is a trouble that women have all the time. And so telling the story and putting it through the lens of two women's experience, I felt heightened all of those issues, because the idea of choosing whether to be a mother or not, if you were a woman in the 40s, if you were in a gay relationship, if you chose, like, that's a much bigger choice, in the sense that if they were to stay together, it would mean that Vera had to sacrifice a family without a shadow of a doubt. Mm-hmm. So in order to make that, give it the highest stakes that it could, I wanted to tell that story. But also because I really want us to see these stories as every day as a straight story.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I think that, you know, you mentioned that element again, mindful that not everybody listening has or watching has seen the film. I did find, you know, the incorporation of some of these realities, the fact that, you know, for a woman in the 40s, it is mutually exclusive, or if 20s to 40s, it's mutually exclusive to choose between the woman you love and to be a mother. And also I think Vera and Gugu's portrayal of that, of her desire to, you know, I think it's okay to say that their relationship, you know, by the time we meet Alice, they're no longer a couple, and it is because of Vera's desire, you know, to have a child and someday, and that desire was given a lot of dignity, and a lot of honor, in a way that sometimes we judge that nowadays.
And I think that was what really touched me, and what was really important to me was to say, do you know what? This is really hard. These questions for women, they were really hard then, they're still really hard now. And I feel like we keep going through phases where people get judged for wanting to be a career woman. Oh, you want to be a writer? Well, oh, you're going to miss out on the best thing that's ever happened to you.
Alice got super judged for her choices.
Yeah, but I mean, I've been told multiple times that I will be missing out and that I will regret it if I don't have children. And yet, you know, last year there was a moment when I felt like, why aren't people crediting people whose choices to be a mother? That's a really valid life choice. And the idea that a housewife, so to speak, is, you know, not an important role. I think that importance of accepting people's choices. I didn't really think it was a choice for me until a couple of years ago. I just assumed that I ought to have children because I'd just been brought up thinking that was what meant that you had a fulfilled life. And it's only been recently that I thought, oh, hang on, no, why have I never asked that question before? And I think the more that we use the arts and storytelling to not only ask these questions, but to encourage people to think more open-mindedly about other people's choices and stop judging them, then, you know, if we can do that as filmmakers, then at least we're contributing something.
There are so many specific things that the film sort of says and reveals about all the different types of ways, you know, to be a woman, to be female. And I think a question I have for both Gemma and Jess is, you know, your careers and have both been marked by female characters that, you know, I guess Vera in Summerland would say, like, not acting like normal people, you know, and, you know, by that, not sort of hewing to the conventional feminine mold. And so I think for, you know, for those are the cinephiles watching who aren't as familiar with Jess's stage career, I think Blue Stockings and Nell Gwyn both feature female protagonists that are trying to work in a man's world, you know. Was that I think, Jess, you've already spoken about it. I'd love to hear you talk more about it. Gemma is, you know, especially as an actress, and especially American audiences first got to know you through Quantum of Solace, you know, you can't get more feminine ideal than a Bond girl. Do you know what I mean? And so how did you consciously, was it a conscious choice for you to, sort of portray characters that were sort of almost seen as deliberately opposing that sort of stereotype?
Yeah, I mean, I think I started off I attribute to my early sort of choices as being completely just grateful to being offered something. And I don't think I ever, when I see the younger actresses these days, like for example, someone like Florence Pugh, who she has so much confidence and belief in herself, and is so, I was not like that at all. And when I was her age, I would just, there's no way a big role like Bond would come up and I'd go, nah, no, that's not for me. I went, yeah, okay, yeah, great, thanks so much, oh wow. And I did it. And then I didn't really think about the repercussions of it. I just thought I'd just do it. And I did have actually a really good time making it, and have made lifelong friends and whatnot. But my God, it was just not what I've never, before that, I'd never watched a Bond film in my life. It's just not what I was interested in doing. And it wasn't until I made a really terrible film in 2013 or 12 or something like that, which was just really hard for me, because I was one of 3 women on set, and the other 2 women were the producer, who was firing everyone left, right and center. So she was like a battle axe, hard bitch. And the other was a makeup artist. And everybody else, it was just the most toxic environment. And I remember, and I just felt like I literally felt like kind of a woman for hire. That's how I felt. Like, go over there, that kind of thing. And I thought, I'm gonna have to stop doing film now, because it's just, what's coming to me is not at all what I am interested in. But that's, I think, because it was a reaction to what my early career choices were, which was, glamorous kind of roles. But in my heart, I knew what I was capable of and what I was interested in. And I was experiencing in my stage career, which was like the complete opposite of what I was experiencing in American film or blockbuster film, not so much the UK stuff, the independent UK stuff. But and then it was after that I just set up my production company, and I was like, right, these things aren't gonna come to me just like that. I'm gonna have to go and make them, or work with people and find them and just think differently. And it took a long time. Like, it's only really started to bear fruit that it takes a long time to change people's perceptions of you, but also to forge those relationships, develop projects and all of that stuff. So I've always felt like I was completely not what everybody thought I was in terms of what I was seen on screen. And so therefore there have been times when I've chosen roles that are destructive or messy or grotesque or whatever it may be, just to go, I'm not that thing, One of the things I delight in with my job is variety and doing something completely different each time, surprising people. So yeah, even though I did do a really glamorous kind of sexy role in a comedy like last year, which was actually quite fun to do, but no, I mean, yeah, it's not me, that kind of stuff. I'm much more comfortable in especially in like more independent film, and obviously we're always searching for multifaceted women in film scripts, which thankfully there's more of these days. But there you go.
I love that there's a little parallel, in the same way that Alice is sort of shunned in her community for being this, cranky single woman, who lives on a hill. There's that parallel tension with the female student Edie, you know, and then the evacuee that her grandma brings in because, you know, Edie is not girly enough, and like it's just this through line that I found to be a really great, compelling. I mean, Edie is kind of a hard ass herself, this 8-year-old.
Yeah.
You know?
I don't have favorites, but it's hard for her not to be. I think I enjoyed writing her nearly more than everybody else because she's just so naughty and she's so freaking clever and she's so ballsy. That's not an expression I should use because that's about a man. You know, as a feminist, I'm not sure about ballsy, but there's not very many other words that mean exactly the same thing. But she's just got so much now. So I think she's channeling Alice, even, and that's why they rub each other up the wrong way, because she kind of wants to be her. It's hard when you meet your heroes, isn't it?
Yeah. I mean, you're almost looking at, you know, a past and future type of self, which is great. Extra dimension. One element I wanted to ask about also, and I know a lot of, you know, this film, and we have so many listener questions that I can't even get to all of them, and a lot of them talk about queer identity and that sort of thing. But one thing I personally wanted to ask about was, you know, whether or not, I want to make sure I ask this correctly. You know, the film has some magical realism in it, and but it also delves into the historical realities facing Alice and Vera as a same-sex couple, you know, and the limitations, the social limitations of that. I was wondering whether or not there was a conscious decision or not. The fact that one half of the couple, that you, Gugu, are a woman of color, and I know that you've spoken about stage roles and about you know, sort of the fact that we sometimes make too big of a deal out of this sort of thing. I bring this up because I think normalization of people of color in any story is very important, but until we get to that point, it's important to walk people through that process of making these decisions, so that a filmmaker, you know, another filmmaker might say, okay, well, how would I go about this? How does this impact my story? How does this impact all of my casting decisions? Can you talk a little bit about that? Hopefully my question makes sense.
Is that a question for me? Sorry, I wasn't sure if that was a question.
I'm so sorry. It was very convoluted. It was like a monologue that went nowhere. I mean, I think it's for maybe for both of you in terms of Gugu with Vera, you know, because I honestly don't know. I think because Vera, especially in Alice's memories, it exists in kind of this, you're not sure, like, is she, even in the first half of the movie, like I was like, is she real? You know, is she imagined? And so is Vera, do you play Vera with a consciousness of being a woman of color in that time, or is that not an element of the story, which is also a valid choice? Does that make sense? I think as a person,
I just play her as a human being and as a vibrant character. I guess for me, it's hard to be conscious of that because that's the shoes I walk in every day. So I don't consciously make every single choice labeling it. I just kind of played her as the character as she was written. I mean, I guess that's more down to Jess as the world that she was creating consciously, you know, in the film. But for me, I can't choose to play those things in a way because that's just what I bring, you know, without even being, you know, conscious of it. So, and it wasn't really something that was discussed in the script. It wasn't a theme of the story. So for me, I just, you know, tried to play her as a sort of, you know, as she was written and as a sort of joyful human being in this relationship.
That makes sense. And I think it's also very important to say that it's important to see these portrayals where it's not just about the stuff, like especially historical portrayals, where it's not about the suffering, the constant suffering.
It's probably worth saying we were asked that quite a few times in production by financiers and executives who said, if you're going to tell an interracial love story, but you know what, that needs to be the story. You know, that needs to be in the story. And I said, why? this isn't about race, you know, this is about two people who love each other. And of course, it's an interracial love story, but we see these two women at points in their life where we're dropping in on these conversations. They're not going to be talking about, you know, there's probably times when that would have been a factor in their lives if these were real people, you know, in Oxford, but that's not the story that we're telling. That's not the drama here. And why can't we just have two people who, you know, one of whom is a person of color and one of whom isn't, being in love with each other, and that's the story we're telling. And I feel really strongly that if the whole film was the story of their relationship and was all set in the 1920s, and we saw them in every different facet of their lives facing the reality of what a couple might have felt, then the fact that they're gay would have been a much greater part of the theme, and possibly, if we chose that, colour as well. But I think it's really important that it doesn't always have to be the talking point. And I hope that, you know, I'm very conscious as a privileged white person that, you know, I don't have the experience of walking in those shoes. And I feel very conscious as a filmmaker of not trying to represent a voice or an experience that in some ways I haven't experienced myself. But I also think that until we begin to cast people of colour in all sorts of different roles in every single story, so these are stories about humanity and not necessarily only about one theme. What a shame for such a lot of fantastically talented actors if the only parts they ever play are to do with the colour of the skin. You know, as a woman, I don't only want to write specifically stories that are just about what it means to be women.
Your gender struggle.
Yeah, I don't. And you know what? Everything that I get offered, nearly everything, is this is a film about this historical woman. I think, well, I've just done 3 of them. That's the last thing I want to do. Give me the opposite of that, you know, because I love talking about femininity. I think it's really important, but I don't want to only do that. I'm an artist. I want to explore everything in the world. And I think we all should have the right to do that. And that's why also, you know, there's diversity across the whole cast, including the extras and including the kids in the school, because this is about making a film where people can walk into the cinema and see it reflecting the communities that they come from. I'm not interested in either whitewashing history or in making films where there's bunches of kids from the area where I live in London who are every colour. I don't want them to come and see the film and not recognize themselves in it, you know. So I think it's vital that it's a key part of the conversation, but we need to also just celebrate diversity on our screens in every way.
Thank you for entertaining my question. And I think I knew how tedious it is to always to still have to answer that question, but why isn't this character white? You know, but I think that this is something that filmmakers, those who are watching, are still getting, as you pointed out, and I thank you for driving that point home. It's something that I think needed to be spelled out still a little bit. Okay, before I get kicked off of my time, I want to ask some craft questions. Jessica, the transition from stage directing, stage writing to doing both of those things for the screen, what did you find to be sort of the most challenging, or the things that you had to really get used to?
A lot of people warned me that it was going to be really hard, that making a feature would be completely different from making a play in terms of as a director. I wonder whether those people are people who don't want to lose their jobs as film directors and want to put other people off, because it's so similar. Of course, you're working in a different form, and there are particular challenges, but they weren't what I expected. So I thought that what was going to be difficult was the technical side of things, but actually you can learn all of that, as I've tried very hard to do. And also, if that's your position and you know you don't know so much about cameras, you get the best possible DOP that you can, and you work with them as much as possible so that A, you trust them to help you make good decisions, but also you can educate yourself. I think the thing that was hardest actually with making a film was shooting out of order, because obviously in rehearsals for a play, you know, you start at the beginning and you'll work your way through, and then you discover some great things as you go, and then you've got time to go back and do it over and over again, and all of those things infuse it. Whereas obviously with a film, if you shoot a late scene and then you go back and you shoot something from the beginning of the story and think, oh, what if this, it's too late because you've already shot the ending. And that was something I had to be very aware of, which is why it's also very useful to be the writer and director, because at least you know your story very, very well. But I think fundamentally your job as a storyteller is to, as a director particularly, is to bring a team together to get your best sort of imaginative world and to make that as clear and as detailed as possible. So it's partly about being a good team leader, and it's also about encouraging everybody else to be as creative as possible. And I think that if you put too much, not too much ego into it, but it has to be about the story. It can't be about you. You can't be too attached to this being your vision. And actually, I think being a good director, particularly of actors, is about allowing an actor to make their very best work and encouraging people to be playful and to try things and to allow them space to bring what they've got to the table rather than imposing too much. And I feel like for me, that's of great value, and that's the same in the theatre as it is on screen.
And for Gemma and Gugu, I mean, you guys have, I mean, you guys have both built filmographies that where you have worked closely with women directors and in you know, with plenty of women. Wondering if, you know, with this latest film with Summerland, what is sort of one takeaway from working on this project that you feel like has enhanced your abilities as an actor, or something that sort of changed you a little bit?
That's a really good question. I think working with Jess and her knowing me was a really good thing, because she pushed me, you know, she knew what I could do or what I did too much of, or so actually having the relationship, like a personal relationship with the director there is was really helpful. And as I'm going forward, I just finished making something else where I became very close with the director, and I actually need that, I think, now going forward, is having a very close relationship with the director, because then you can really trust them, and you can have really frank conversations about what the scene needs. Or, you know, on Summerland, Jess and I were very, it was like we had a shorthand. So if it was too much, she could just say, you know, a little bit much, and I wouldn't get offended by it. Whereas on previous films where I've not had any relationship with the director, or they've been pulled every which way and they've got no interest in being, you know, having a relationship with you or whatever it may be, that's much more difficult to accomplish that kind of trust and relationship. So I think that for me it really solidified that need for me going forward with directors, I think. Yeah.
Makes sense. What about you, Gugu?
I mean, for me, definitely just so inspired by both Jess and Gemma and how they put this together, you know, as producers as well. And, you know, and I think I agree with you, Gemma. I think also on this particularly, and I was in and out, you know, I wasn't in it, you know, in the long haul as obviously as much as Gemma was, but, you know, I think that there was that feeling of sisterhood and that feeling of, you know, coming, and I know people kind of use that term, but like this felt so genuine because we have so much shared experience in different ways and theatre backgrounds, and, you know, me and Gemma went to the same drama school. I mean, we weren't there at the same time, but we probably had the same tutors and, you know, mutual friends. And there's that thing of, you know, when you feel your generation kind of rise in a way, when you see and you feel them evolve, and there's such a pride in that, you know, and feeling Jess coming from theatre and taking the helm here. I don't know, it's just a really, it's a great feeling, because it takes a long time. Or it felt like it's taken a long time to feel, you know, the women in our industry just really just rise. And so I will always just take that with me, just that sense of feeling your generation maturing into the next stage of their careers, and you know, can't wait to do it again.
Thank you so much to the three of you for just giving us your time and sharing your insights and entertaining all of my questions. Again, there are 25 unanswered questions in this chat. People had really thoughtful things to say. I'm sorry we couldn't get to everything, but I do hope people tune in on Friday. Is that right? Friday? Right. To see Summerland. It is beautiful. And I think, like what Gemma was describing when she read the script, when you see the film, there are definitely parts that will take your breath away and make tears spring to your eyes. And it's just a beautiful breath of much needed air. So thank you, the three of you guys, for your time and for making this film. And then now I'll kick it to Ebony.
Thank you all so much. I know it's a bit late for a Zoom chat where you are, so I really appreciate all of your being here. I love that Gemma's Zoom screen now looks like kind of a moody Dutch.
It's so dramatic. It's awesome.
I need to turn more lights on, but I didn't want to get up, so I've just got this one lamp.
Perfect. And it was a perfect backdrop to the very thoughtful responses that all of you gave, and I really appreciate that. I think the ways that you talk about your work, about the craft, you know, like falling into a role, you know, transitioning from theater to film. I was captivated by this entire discussion, and I thank you all for being here. This was absolutely wonderful. Again, the film is available on demand this Friday. You know, if theaters are open in your country, still wear a mask. I don't want nobody.
Wear a mask.
Can I just add, actually, because it was one of the questions, it is in cinemas in the USA on Friday as well. It's on over 100 screens across the country, just in case that is a screen near you, if you want to see it on the big screen. It's also in cinemas in the UK, and we're doing some live Q&As, and hopefully in cinemas across the world. So as well as being on the small screen, it will be on the big screen. Hooray! Yeah,
absolutely. I mean, there is something special about, especially a film like this on the big screen. So if you can do it safely, and there is a, you know, cinema near you, please do go check it out. But we want you to see it no matter what way you do. And I love that you all are going to be doing more live Q&As, because we actually have a couple questions about that. People are just really, really interested in this film and already loving it. So thank you for giving us your time. Thank you to the people watching us on Zoom, on Facebook. We're delighted to have you here for these kind of conversations with these wonderful, wonderful female creatives. And I hope to see you next week. So take care, everyone. Thank you again for being here.
Thank you so much.
Bye.
Bye.